So if it was a relatively limited attack, a few aircraft and a few missiles, we have typhoons on alert 24/7 that will be airborne and will be intercepting that type of a threat, quite a long way away from UK shores. We're part of a NATO system. NATO would be tracking those aircraft long before they come within range of the UK, and they would be passed on and passed on. So there is a very, very sophisticated and well-found network and system designed to cater for a limited type of event. I mean, they're also there for a sort of 9/11 type of event as well, for a hijacking or something like that. So in terms of a relatively benign, I say benign, relatively limited strike, we have the capability. But the aircraft and the weapons to do that would run out quite quickly. We don't have the entire Air Force on alert today. This is not like that. We're not in the Battle of Britain. Okay, we don't have aeroplanes literally on alert spread all around the country. We just have about less than 10 aircraft on alert on any one time. It's quite a lot less than 10. So that's not going to defend against something of a significant size. It wouldn't defend the sort of attack you see in Ukraine every day. Just wouldn't. So if we were going to be facing something like Ukraine faces every day, we'd have to put the entire Air Force on alert, and even then it would be stretched. You have some Type 45 missile air defense destroyers in the Royal Navy. I think of the 6 we have, 4 are in maintenance, and 1 is in the Gulf. So that's not going to do it either. You have some army systems. We have about half a dozen. Most of those are deployed overseas to places like the Falkland Islands. So we're thin, really, really, really thin, because we didn't buy them for that type of a threat. We kind of wished that threat away. Well, it's turned up now. If you wanted to bring the missile systems back from deployment, that would take a matter of days. We've got aeroplanes that can fly to the Falklands and back, within a day. So we could bring all those systems back. The argument would be, of course, what are you now doing about the Falklands? So, that problem doesn't go away. So the Type 45s is going to take you months to try and bring those back online because of the maintenance that's required on them. They're going through an upgrade program, etc. So that would take a long time. The Air Force could stand up relatively quickly. So if you told the Air Force tomorrow, right, everybody on alert, but how long for? A month? A year? You'd wear it out. Wear it out. And I can tell you now that the number of missiles that we possess are designed for short wars of choice where we don't expect a significant air threat to be present. We all think the same thing. We may end up disagreeing about the solution to the problem, but the problem set exists and we can't deny it. And I think over the last 2 decades, we have denied it. We partly denied it because we didn't have the money to be able to afford to meet it. So it was convenient to not think it was a threat because it then made your defense look like it was properly resourced, didn't it? So that's what's been going on for the last sort of 15 years. Yes, it is the worst case. It's the nightmare scenario, but the nightmare scenario is a lot closer today than it was 2 years ago because of what's been going on. And the issue here isn't about being ready to fight. It is, but actually in being ready to fight, you stop the thing happening in the first place. And that's the key here. This is not a bunch of old generals and air marshals warmongering because they're desperate to have a fight with Russia. You tend to find that we're the last people that want to fight with Russia because we're the ones that die when it happens. The politicians don't, and the electorate hopefully don't die in the process. But the people that normally do get killed is the military. So the idea that the military are sort of busting for a fight here is just ridiculous. But what the military are questioning is whether we have the strength that will deter that from happening in the first place. And if you don't have that strength in the first place, you do make the chance of an attack more likely because it will expose the gaps. It will create the challenge and it will cause the grief. And that's what Russia looks to exploit. It exploits weakness. It thought Ukraine was weak. It thought the West was weak. It did not think for 1 minute that that Ukraine would last as long as it did. And it certainly didn't think that the West would spend the next 2 to 3 years spending tens or hundreds of billions of dollars re-equipping it. But that's exactly what has happened. And so it's that strength that has denied Russia its intent. Now, imagine if we demonstrated that strength in 2014. This is a conversation I have quite a lot with a lot of people, and it's kind of symptomatic of how the rest of the West now needs to think about Russia. It is much easier for Ukraine to think this way because clearly Russia is on their border, but more importantly is now inside their border. So when your nation is under threat, this becomes a completely stark problem that you have to deal with. And it means putting your sons and daughters in harm's way, and that's a position that we haven't had to endure for 80 years. So I think the question for the West is are we fully cognizant of this threat, and what are we prepared to do for the next few years in order to ensure this doesn't happen again? Because I think that's the key here. This is not about fighting Russia next. It's about deterring Russia from going further or even doing what it's doing now. And Russia, unfortunately, only really understands strength. Everything else it will exploit as a weakness. It only understands strength, and it only understands, a calculation that it knows it can't win. Putin made a decision to invade Ukraine because he thought he could win it. He genuinely thought the West was not really going to care very much. Ukraine wasn't going to have the capability, that Russian capability could overwhelm it in a couple of days. Well, it hasn't worked. Now we see Putin changing his tune. What his original reasons for the invasion have now completely disappeared. And now he's trying to seek, land, which we all knew was what his intention was anyway. So he is a bully, and how you stand up to those bullies and how we get our own nations to see that threat as real. In the military today, we have a problem with recruitment. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but there now needs to be a recognition that there is a threat, a real threat. And when you're a Baltic state, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Poland, and Ukraine, you see that every day. Now, sitting here in our nice, safe little island at the back, it's perhaps been something that we've kind of ignored. But if you go back to the V1 and Doodlebugs, we could be back there. We could be back there. They have systems now that can reach us here back at home. And for 80 years, we thought that would never happen again. Well, we're now in a situation where it could, and I think we need to wake up to that. You've got Russia now in such a state that I don't think it is predictable. I mean, we all hope they're rational and that they are thinking about this in a rational way. But, do you rationally continue to invade a country for three years when you're losing 1,000 troops a day? I mean, that's pretty irrational. You start talking about the use of nuclear weapons on state-controlled TV. That's irrational. So I think we perhaps shouldn't wish this away too quickly. We've been doing that for 20, 30 years, and maybe now is the time to wake up to the fact that it's real. I think the major difference between today and 1938, 1939 is that in those decades, you could rebuild quickly. You could literally convert a piano factory to make mosquitoes. That's what's happened because you were mostly making things out of wood. And if you were a craftsman or a car factory, you turn the car factory into suddenly making airplanes. You can't do that anymore. You just can't. Now, you might be able to make a few cheap drones, but we're not talking about small, cheap drones here. We're talking about major war with weapon systems that can travel thousands of miles.